Welcome back to Fish's Call Sheet, where we celebrate all the amazing, talented people who make production possible. Today, on this episode, we're going to dive into the world of music with composer Randy Miller. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you. Happy to be here and happy to be sharing some time exploring stuff with you.
Music is not my forte, but it literally is the thing that sets the tone for pretty much everything we do. Great music kind of often is that thing that sets the tone that you don't even realize has started until you're kind of into it, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, that's the heart of what film music and media music is all about. Having people connect more with the images and the dialogue and the sound, and it kind of becomes a cohesive universe of sound and music, all to support the film or the TV show or the video. So let's do another version of this. My name is Randy Miller. I am from the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. We just need to start off soft, which I think we are, but we need a little build. Once we get to 16, we can play out a little bit the rest of the way. Okay, let's go again. I've been composing music for a long time. I've worked on many, many different types of films and theater productions and live productions. And I've drawn elements from all of those and my childhood to a place where I combine all these different elements. One of the aspects of composing is the discovery period. And that's when you get a film, you get a project, and you're working on it, and you're trying different types of music, different styles, different combination of instruments or maybe electronic sounds. And one of the real joys is when you go, wow, that's what really works. When you have a small ensemble performing your music, could be just 3 or 4 players, you hear each individual player as compared to a 70, 80-piece group. But when you have just a few musicians, you're trying to bring out the individual qualities of each of these players. And that brings something special to the music. Recently I did this with a small group of players that I hadn't met before, and they were fantastic. They each added their own voice and sound to the music, and I feel that that contributed to a very special sounding score. Music now has become a little bit more atmospheric and textural. That thematic material is what really gives a score a distinctive sound. So what I'm trying to do is make a strong statement with a theme, but surround that with world elements, with synths, with electronic sounds, sometimes with a small group of musicians and sometimes with a much larger group, even an orchestra, but still maintaining a thematic element to all the different ingredients of what the film score is.
What do people think a composer does?
Well, there are a lot of different types of composers. There's composers of classical music, which everybody would know, like Tchaikovsky. And there's composers of songs, so songwriters, but they're still composers. There's composers of music for media, which is what I am. So we're writing music that's mostly in the background of a media project, but sometimes becomes the foreground when there's, say, no dialogue or, say, a montage that features music. And composing doesn't necessarily mean writing it down. I happen to be that kind of composer that writes everything down, but you don't have to write anything down to be a composer. So it's a really broad umbrella for what composing really is.
It changes a little from film and television, obviously, because of tone and the style. But what do you normally do, like when you come to a film project? How does that begin for you, and what does that look like?
That's a great question, too. So much depends on schedules. The ideal situation is when you have literally a year to write a score. That practically never happens. On occasion, it does. Occasionally, I'm brought into a project when it's in pre-production. It hasn't even been shot. Composers are normally paid a certain amount of money, and it doesn't matter how short or how long of a time that we have to write the score. So the more time, the better. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because the flip side of having a year, which is, like I said, very rare, would be coming in to, say, replace someone else's score, or because something happened and the release schedule got condensed terribly. So you have 2 or 3 weeks or less to write the score. And everything's in between. But to answer your question, the average way would be a movie you might have 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks to write the score. Could be anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes of music. TV show is different. As you know, the schedules of TV shows are very organized, very condensed. Episodes are happening at the same time, concurrent at different stages. So a composer on a TV show is going to be working every week. And you might have, 7 to 10 days or less to finish anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes of music. And to give you a sort of a reference, most composers write anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 or 4 minutes per day. If it's a big orchestral score, you're lucky if you can get through a minute or two a day. If it's something much smaller, like a synth score for a TV show, you could probably get through a couple minutes a day. So that's how you get the sort of time. If you take the amount of minutes and you divide how much you can do per day, it can take anywhere from, a week to a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and for people who don't really have a reference, like a half-hour show usually is about 22 minutes of production time. So that's your music could be the majority of that episode, or it could be across just a portion of that episode, and probably the beginning and the end especially.
That's so true. And especially in comedies, there's not a lot of music. There's play on, play offs, opening credit, end credits. Say a half an hour show, maybe 10 minutes of music or less. So in a drama, say a TV show that's runs 45 minutes aside from commercials, or, approximately. There could be 30 minutes of music or more. That's a lot more than a half-hour sitcom, maybe, which might be 5 or 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes most. Going even one step past that would be TV movies, where I did a series of 6 TV movies in 2008, 17 and 18, where they were 90 minutes long, TV movies, and the producers of that show wanted wall-to-wall music. And anytime there was no music, hey, you need put some music in this spot. So literally the 85-minute length movie had 85 minutes of music. There was no spots open. So they just wanted music wall-to-wall. It was the nature of the type of production and the type of films that this company made. So that's like, from a couple minutes in a sitcom to wall-to-wall music. Most composers, including myself, can write a few minutes a day at most, and less if it's orchestral music for a feature film. Then you're lucky if you can get through 1 or 2 minutes a day. Having said all that, it all depends on schedules. Going back to what we first talked about, if you had months and months to work on something, then you're not worrying about how much you're getting done per day. You're worrying about the quality, and you're trying to really make it the best you can and the most creative and you're trying to stretch as a composer. And that's the ideal situation. And the TV schedule, TV series or TV movies of the week type thing, you just have to get it done and do it quickly and do it professionally, and move on to the next episode or the next project.
For you, how does that process start? I imagine it's so unique because anybody who's dealt with music, they realize how long minutes of music are. But for you, where does that process begin, and what are your big motivations?
That's a complex question too. A lot of parts to it. So that goes back to kind of what I was saying about having a lot of time. And it ties into that, because if you don't have a lot of time and you have to write really quickly, I mean, honestly, you have your ways of handling scenes. I mean, for myself, I've done this for a long time. I haven't written for every type of scene. There's always some new one, which is exciting and different. I actually started in the early 90s. So that's a long time ago, where computers, there were computers and we used computers then, but not to the extent now. So back then, when I first started, you had to imagine what the score would sound like as a composer in your head. Or I'm a pianist, so I can go over to the piano and play what I want the orchestra to sound like. And I say that because you were asking about the composing process.
Right.
So for me, back then, which is a carryover to now, is the way I still do things. If I have time, I come up with the main thematic motifs or themes of whatever the genre is. And sometimes it's actually not just themes. It could be just chord progressions or rhythms or textural sounds. When I have a choice and I have the luxury, I experiment for really a week or so, or even more, just coming up with themes on the piano or really away from the picture. I look at the picture, get some inspiration. I look at the notes, especially the director notes, like what this director, he or she, wants the music to do for the film. That is very inspirational. It gets your mind kind of thinking about what the score should be. Kind of one other big sort of hovering element to this, and that's something called temp scores, which is short for temporary scores. And almost all filmmakers put in music as the editor is editing the scenes together, the editor is adding music. And I'm going to tie this into the process in a second, but when there's music added, the composer, I'm hearing this music that the filmmakers like. So that's suggestive of what I should write for music. So that is also going to influence the early stages of composition. On occasion, like the film I'm just finishing up now, which we'll talk about at some point, I'm sure, there was no temporary score, no temp score, which is ideal. It's great because then your imagination can do anything you want. It's risky because you don't know what the filmmakers want, right? Because there's no suggestion of it. There's no music in there. So all those things factor into how I start writing. And then I want to also tie that into what I said about my vintage, being in this business a long time, right? So back when I first started, we didn't have all the really complex synthesizer electronic gear that we have now. I know my studio is filled with this stuff. And I can instantly just play any sound I want from any part of the world, and I can hear it. And I can realize it in 10 minutes. I can come up with something that sounds kind of like what the score is going to be or the scene is going to be. When I started out, we didn't have that. We had just piano and a few basic synthesizers, practically no internet. So you had to do a little more imaginative. Stuff worked. I don't mean the music's more imaginative than music now. I just meant you couldn't realize it as quickly, so you had to imagine it in your mind. If you play a piano and you really want to hear strings, it's still just piano unless you can make your thoughts feel like that would be the string part. So now the way I write is depending on the schedule and depending on if there's a temp score, what kind of score, and but I try to write all the thematic, textural, rhythmic, motivic material before I actually start writing particular scenes. When I finally get to the point where I'm writing particular scenes, I rarely start at the beginning of the movie. I take other areas or a TV show that aren't as demanding as the main title or the end title and kind of experiment, kind of in the internal parts of the movie. And that's really the first couple of weeks of that early process.
I was curious, when you're doing these projects, what are the ones that stick out the most to you? Things that have music that you just are so proud of? And then even if there's projects, like I know for me, there's a few projects I wish I could go back and get a second shot at, just because I think I've grown and I'd like to do some things different.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I love these questions, and they make me think about everything that I've done. The projects, and I'm saying this from the heart. The projects that I've done that have meant the most are the documentaries that I feel like can help the planet a little bit, even in my own small way as a composer. Hands down, those are the ones that, and actually they're not necessarily documentaries. They're also films that have a message. That's something. Those particular ones rarely are the highest paying ones or the ones that pay my bills and whatnot, but those are the ones that mean the most to me. And I'm fortunate to have done some, and quite a few. 2 years ago, I worked on a documentary called The Heart of Nuba. And that was really interesting. That was all about the Nuba people in South Sudan. And this is when there was genocide going on there. And it still is, but it's much better. It actually has stopped, partly because of this film. This film was about one doctor who was treating close to 1 million people. There was very few doctors in that area of the world. To be part of something like that and contribute to and make an awareness of what was happening there was such a good feeling. It made an impact, and it actually got to the point where the government was overthrown in Sudan. That happened about a year ago, and hopefully it'll turn into a democracy, but we'll see. Those kind of projects where you feel like you made a difference really means something. And going back even more, a few years before, I worked on a film called Extinction Soup, which was all about the sharks, and the sharks are being decimated. Their fins are being cut off. So that was a documentary as well. Those kind of projects, you feel like you're helping. Freedom to Marry, which was another one, which was bringing attention to same-sex marriage, which was also had an impact. As far as feature films, a film I worked on many years ago with a Japanese recording artist named Kitaro, who did a lot of new age music. He's Japanese. We worked on an Oliver Stone film called Heaven and Earth, and that brought attention to that was Oliver's kind of third film about the Vietnam experience, and that kind of brought attention to the actual people living in Vietnam. So that also put out a message. So those kind of projects have a lasting impact on my life, and I feel like I'm contributing. You know, us in the entertainment business, we're not teachers at high schools and doctors in emergency rooms. So when we can help out this planet to make it a slightly better place, that feels really good. As far as type of music that helped me expand as a composer, like the Heart of Nuba. So that was all African music, and I used African musicians. I worked on a film years ago called Time Over Time, which was based off a Norman Mailer novel, which was all jazz. And I love jazz, and I grew up playing jazz, so it was a chance to kind of do a 1960s John Coltrane-ish type of score. And as a film composer, you get to do a lot of variety of things. So that was really a lot of fun. And really just about every film that I work on where I have enough time and I can experiment, then I feel like I am expanding and reaching and pulling in new influences. Now, things I'd like to do better is just about every score. There's, every time I hear something that I've done, I go back and I think, that cue's pretty good, but that one, the next one, I could have done better on that. So there's never ending sort of wish they could go back and tweak and do it better. And a lot of that has to do with the time, like we were talking about before. If you don't have enough time, you can't really do your very, very best work. You do good work, but it's not your very, very best.
What brought you to music? What started that passion for you?
I grew up in the Catskills, up in upstate New York. There was a lot of music. At that time, there was bungalow colonies and hotels, and there was music in every one of them. My mother was a professional vocalist before she moved from New York City and married my dad up in this little mountain town up in the Catskills called Ellenville, New York. She was a professional vocalist and traveled everywhere and sang. And so there was always music in our house. She would bring in pianists to rehearse in the living room and she, even when she was raising her family, myself and my two brothers, she would bring in professional musicians to rehearse the shows that she was doing in the local hotel. She was done with touring, so it was just doing the different gigs in different hotels. So it's always around that, and I would watch the pianist accompany her singing. And even though I didn't start off accompanying vocalists, I was in rock bands and a jazz band and a high school band playing clarinet. I was around this stuff all the time, but it didn't take too long. By the time I was in my late teens, I was already accompanying her on some of her shows as a pianist, and she was doing mostly Broadway stuff, some semi-legit, which is sort of like some operetta type of material, but mostly Broadway and popular songs. And so I was learning how to accompany her as a vocalist in my late teens and early 20s. That really informed so much about my future musicianship. But one single event that my mom took me down to Broadway, and we saw The King and I, and it was a second revival. It was in the early 70s, I think, and Yul Brynner starred in it. And I remember sitting up close at the stage, and I could see the pit orchestra playing this King and I, which is one of my favorite all-time scores, Roger and Hammerstein. And I was listening to the orchestra, and I just was that's what I want to do. I want to orchestrate and write for musicals. But it was really more about orchestration for the musicals. I didn't really want to write the songs. He became a favorite of mine, Robert Russell Bennett, who's passed away a long time ago, but he was the orchestrator and sort of a right-hand man to Richard Rodgers for many, many years. That was a seminal moment for me where I thought, wow, that is a lot different than some of the rock bands and some of the jazz things I was doing in high school. So that this is this Broadway production with this beautiful orchestra playing this beautiful, beautiful music. And to this day, I still think about that moment. And I actually, Robert Russell Bennett wrote a book about music for theater. And I remember studying it in college at Berkeley, in Boston. And the book disappeared. I could never find it. I finally found it on, like eBay or Amazon or something 2 or 3 years ago, and I bought it. It's on my shelf. It was a couple $100, literally a couple $100. But I snapped it up right away because it reminded me of that moment watching The King and I in the early 70s.
Isn't it amazing how a moment, right? You kind of know in a moment, like your life changes. It's the life before that moment, and then when you kind of have that epiphany of what your passion is.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think about that moment, but really what happened at that moment was I was still also really interested in biology.
Oh.
Yeah. And I went my first semester to college as a biology major because I was torn. I love the outdoors, and I still do. And I still have this attachment to the outdoors and biology and all these things. So I went for one semester as a biology major. That deep feeling of wanting to be a musician was too strong. And so I left and went to a different school and entered as a music major. Even like you said, at that moment, that's really what I want to do. But I wasn't 100% sure. I wasn't 100% sure.
Well, it's not practical, right? Like I was going to be a veterinarian. I love biology and I love animals. So you're speaking my language. But I grew up in this business, and I've loved acting from the beginning, but I also loved the behind the scenes portion of the reason I write and direct and produce is exactly what you said about like being able to do a documentary that may make an impact on society, where you can touch people, where you can progress a thought or share a story that hasn't really been told. It's everything.
Can you just put those words into my mouth when I speak those? That was way better put than, but that's exactly, really well put. That's exactly how I feel. And you probably have, I mean, not that I'm going to interview you, but I want to ask you a few things.
Sure.
You still have that feeling about animals and veterinarian and the outdoors and all. I'm sure it's still deep inside you.
Every day, and I love it. And I have lots of pets, and I spend lots of time outdoors, and I made my kids animal lovers. There's a part of me that knows that I could have done that, and I would have enjoyed it. And so I've been around veterinary medicine my whole life as well. But I realized that this pushes me in a way and brings me to life in a way that probably could have done in a lesser sense, but I don't know if it could have ever matched this.
That's so true. And I feel the same way. I feel like I could have gone through life as a biologist, maybe a field biologist, maybe a researcher. I don't know. Who knows? But, and I could have been happy and I could have done it, taken that road. Maybe I would have had regrets a lot about music. Maybe not. And there's no way to know. But I love that I can have sort of my cake and eat it too, because I'm a composer and I work in music every day, which I absolutely love, even when I'm complaining about schedules and sometimes getting paid very little, and all the things that we complain about. But yet I'm going to just look up. I can look up and I see we live in Old Topanga. There's nothing but open space. I mean, I see bobcats, I see deer, I see rabbits, I see everything every day. And I just love it. I love hiking. I love being outside. So that's why I say I can have my sort of cake and kind of eat it too, which is really nice.
I laugh because I think there's something about biology for me. And I think Kip, who I mentioned before, had mentioned your name to me, was a biology major once upon a time. And a couple other people I've interviewed have been biology majors. And I think there's something about the connection. People drawn to biology, I think, are drawn to the connection and the way things work and interact as like a system and a whole.
Yeah.
And then I'm in this moment thinking, well, music is very much like that. And production is like that. It's all of these individual pieces that all have to come together in a synergy, in kind of a homeostasis, so to speak, to make something stand above and make things balance and work.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That is so true. And there's that collaborative spirit that you're talking about is in both fields. And I myself, very much a collaborative person, whether it would be, in music or if I was, in some other field of science. It's definitely a collaborative effort. Having said that, on the other hand, a little different than what you do. You're an actor, a director, a producer, filmmaker, right?
Yeah,
so
writer.
And writer. So you're with a lot of people a lot of time. I mean, maybe not in the last year, given Zoom and the pandemic, but
Right.
You've been on set since you were little, and composers are much different in that way because this is my box here, and I spend all my time, and I love this box. Like I said, I have views of the entire open Topanga, vista here, and but yet I'm in this space all the time, unless I'm going to the studio to record an orchestra, other people's smaller studios for a few musicians. But 90% of the time I'm here just working quietly. So that's a little different, even though the collaborative spirit is still there. I must be part of the team, like you mentioned, the filmmaking team that needs to work together. I'm not actually in the presence of a lot of people. Not that I'm a hermit. I'm not a hermit.
No,
Sometimes I feel like
the nature of what you do kind of lends it. Because like I always tell people when I'm editing, because I was an editor for a while.
There you go.
You lock me in a dark room and I don't come out until I'm done, pretty much. It's like, and it's not that I don't like people, but it's funny. It's like I have to get it to a point where other people can fully see all of the work and the progress of what we're doing. And then I get the notes and have to go back in the cave.
Right, and that is a perfect example of what composers, the process that we go through. I mean, and I like that too. I mean, I love people. I'm friendly. I'm easy to get along with. But I also like to be quiet. And this field and the work that I do gives me plenty of time to be quiet. And and as you say, you just kind of disappear and do your work and come out and get your notes and carry on to whatever's next.
How did you find your way into this business? You start out, you're writing music, and you talked about writing for like musicals and stage. What brought you to Hollywood, to this crazy business?
Yeah, no, it was my path, right? And everybody's path is so different. It is interesting. When I finished college, halfway through college, I was doing a lot of musicals. All right, this is college level, but I was also working professionally in the local theaters as a keyboard player while I was in college. This is in Boston. But in my last semester, or actually it was the last year, I think, at Berkeley, they started a film music program. It really didn't exist before that. But at that time, it just started up. And so I'm going to take some classes in film music, although I wasn't that interested in it. I mean, I loved, some scores I remember when I was a kid from TV and whatnot. But I did take those film music classes, and then I really liked it. I went, wait a second, this may be more important to me than even theater, even though I love theater. I just felt like there was more opportunities in media music, meaning at that time was film or TV. There was no, no internet and anything, right. And no video games or anything. But so that got me interested in film music. And when I graduated, didn't feel ready to go out to Los Angeles. And I had family, and my family had a place in Florida. There were snowbirds, like typically many Northeasterners. They're in there, and especially when they get older and they start to retire, they have a place in the north. And luckily, my family was able to get an apartment, a condo in South Florida. I went down there really right after I graduated. I mean, right after the next week to spend time with my family, and I got work right away as a pianist and really as a pianist more than anything else in South Florida. There was a lot of music, still is a lot of music happening at all the hotels and whatnot. And I said, okay, this sounds pretty good. So I started working there, but pretty soon, within a year, I really wanted to get back to writing because I was working mostly as a pianist and composing. So I started getting as much work as I could as a composer, which mostly meant some commercials. But then I started doing a lot of work as a string arranger, meaning I was writing string arrangements for records and songs and whatnot. And I started doing quite a bit of that. And that led me to get an offer to come out to Los Angeles by a producer. A producer came in from Los Angeles, a record producer, and wanted me to write string arrangements for the vocalist, which I did and conducted them in South Florida, called Criteria, which is the famous Bee Gees studio there at the time. And that same producer brought me out to Los Angeles to finish the project. It was really exciting. I'd never been past the Mississippi. I had toured in different rock bands and different things up to about Ohio, but I'd never been all the way out to California. She brought me out to California, and I met a lot of great studio musicians here. I was arranging and conducting the strings in one of the studios in Los Angeles. And so that kind of made the connection to Los Angeles. Then I went back, I finished the project, and I went back to Florida. And then I saw an ad in the Musicians Union paper for a program at USC, was called Advanced Studies in Film Scoring. It was the first year. They just started it. And it was a graduate level program in film scoring with unbelievable talent in terms of the faculty. Like Alexander Courage was my composition teacher who wrote the theme from Star Trek, the TV movie, the really famous one that everybody knows. And so he was one of the teachers. And so, I love that kind of stuff. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And it was very hard to get into it, but I did get accepted into it. So I was proud of that. Got in my Honda Civic and just drove out to California, left everything behind in Florida. Didn't know anybody except for the studio musicians, and did that program. That brought me out to Los Angeles. And I did have some contacts with the players I mentioned, the studio players that I knew. Matter of fact, one of them was so gracious to let me stay at his house for a few weeks in Woodland Hills, and that was just to get me acclimated until I got my own place. When I went to school, it was the late 80s, like 88, around when I actually moved out here. I got an offer to be a courier. Just drive. I mean, that's how you got music from one place to the next. You couldn't just send it over the internet and print it. So couriers were used all the time to take music from a composer's house to the sound stage and then back to the copyist, kind of move it all around. So I met a French horn player. She hired me she was also a copyist, music copyist, the people that write the music for the actual individual musicians. And she sent me out to a composer's house in Malibu. When I went to his house, beautiful house right on the ocean, I was like, wow, this is quite the lifestyle. This is, I'm living in a little apartment in Hollywood. And I was so impressed with it. And he said, something, my assistant composer, I had to let him go. And I just let him go a few days ago. I'm looking for somebody else. That was the first day I started working on this courier job. He said, I understand you're a composer. I said, yeah. He goes, okay, go home to your apartment and write some music and send it to me, which I did. He hired me a few days later. Amazing. So I only worked one day on that job.
But right place, right time, right? Most effective courier ever.
Thank you. Yeah, that was so timely. It was great. It was such a cool thing. And he hired me to start working for him on all his films. I worked for him, I don't know, from around 88 till around 90 or 91, all kinds of films, writing orchestra pieces, writing small pieces, writing ensemble. And some of these were A-list films. And I had ended up getting demo tapes, which was everything for a composer. You needed to prove what you sound like. And so because I was writing for another composer and working for another composer that was working on big budget films, my demo tape sounded really good for someone just starting out. It's had full orchestras playing these pieces.
It was a different time period because now people can make demo reels in their home, right? But in those days, to have access to musicians and to have an orchestra, because it's the only way to get the full sound.
God, that's so interesting you brought that up. It's so true what you just said. That is such a good point, because that was what made you have something that another composer a young composer didn't have, was having that wonderful studio orchestra-sized A-list level sounding demo tape.
Yeah, and what a unique thing. I mean, I remember, we started, ironically, pretty close at the same time. Obviously, I was young, was a kid, and was just kind of finding my way, but we're all kind of finding our way in the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
Because I started in 88. That time period, you really had to kind of fight to make it or be in the right places and put the pieces together. It lent itself to the people who were still around really have a substantial kind of grasp of the business because they watch the shift from kind of, I don't want to say from kind of pre-digital to
Yeah.
digital and modern.
So true. I mean, that's so true. In the composing world back then, there was, I mean, I really wasn't a composer that anybody knew. I mean, I just was starting out. But having said that, there was probably, I don't know, maybe 300 or 400 really busy composers in Los Angeles. And that was it. And there was only, you know, X amount of TV shows, X amount of movies per year. Showtime and HBO were just kind of getting going. So there really wasn't a lot of work. And I was able to squeeze my way in doing some small films and small TV shows, just starting out. As compared to now, when young composers come to me all the time and ask for advice. And it's just what you just said. Now it's so different because there's probably thousands and thousands of working composers instead of a couple hundred. And but the ratio is probably the same. So back then there was a couple hundred and maybe, you know, 1,000 jobs, whatever. Now there's, you know, thousands of composers, but 5 times that amount of different projects because of every cable show, every internet show, every YouTube show, everything. There's so much work, just very different times. But in some ways, you still have to make yourself distinctive then, you know, and now.
What are projects that jump out at you or something that you just are hungry to try, something you haven't got to do enough of?
In my career, I've done a little bit of everything. Well, I only did that one score, the one jazz score, which is called Time Over Time, but I would really love to do more of that. So even though, you know, I have done one, it was a lot of fun doing it. I'd like to do more. It's something that goes back to my upbringing and when I was very young, and it's something close to my heart.
So Randy, a lot of composers, a lot of musicians early on in their career and at times throughout their career end up ghostwriting. What can you say about that for musicians and for people? Because so often we hear people's work and we don't fully know who to accredit to in this business, and the same thing for writing.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's the same thing with writing, and it goes way back into the 30s and the 40s when studios had, you know, back then all the major studios had orchestras on staff every day. That's been gone since the early 60s, and they also had composers on staff, and the composers on staff were oftentimes the head of the studios, major names. Underneath those composers were a slew of, you know, just, I don't know, could have been 5 to 10, I would imagine, composers that were working under the main composer, and they didn't get credit.
And brilliant people. Brilliant. Just true artists. I mean, people who made world-changing music, but they weren't the main name.
So true, and perhaps more talented than the credited composer. You know, that's a subjective discussion. And so that tradition continued, and it continued up to now, and was how I got started, working under other composers, ghostwriting music. That term is not used, you know, you have to be careful with that term. You don't want to divulge who you wrote for. If you're not credited with the music, then you have to take responsibility. Take responsibility
of the deal is you don't, because I've done the same thing on the writing side, right? So you don't get credit and you can't really take credit because part of the agreement when you started was that you were working essentially under this person, and that you're, by the nature of ghost writing, ghost composing, you're acknowledging that you're going to contribute, but that you don't take the credit, because then it becomes a conflict over whose work is it and all of these things. And that's part of the agreement at the beginning, and you sign NDAs and all of these things. So it can be very hard sometimes for people to acknowledge or get the credit that in many cases they do deserve as an artist, but from a business standpoint, that's just the way it was set up.
That's so true. And again, better put than I could have ever said, but it's exactly like that. And if you make the agreement, you need to honor that agreement. And I've always honored that agreement. And I have made those agreements. And to this day, I've honored those agreements. There are composers that I know that did not honor that agreement, and then after the fact went out and told the world. And usually it doesn't go well for them when they do that, because that's not part of the agreement. Having said that, there is probably a better way, which also happens as often as the ghostwriting, where you are writing for another composer and you do get credit. In that way, it's not ghostwriting, it's just additional music. And that's the credit that you would get, additional writer, or what would it be in the writing world?
Well, in the writing world, usually you get a lower title. I mean, it depends on if someone else might be the executive or the creator at this point because of producers and things like that from a writing standpoint. But you might get story by, and they're the writer of the episode or the writer of the film, or you get a contribution. And that's the hard part. I think part of it is it's the dynamics of any business. And I think people, not just in our business, but everywhere can relate to. Some people share credit. Some people want sole credit for lots of different reasons. And there are people who agree to shared credit or sole credit, and then people come back later and try to kind of usurp it or do something else. And what usually happens is you get one job that way, but you kind of announce to the whole world that you're not going to honor these things. And once you don't have that integrity, that follows you as well for your career. So.
And that's what I was talking about, right? It doesn't usually go well. And no, that's well put. And it's the same thing. Yeah. So the other way would be just to get additional music credit if you're on a project, and the additional composing credit can be for many different reasons. It could be that the other composer is simply too busy and hey buddy, come on and help me. I need to get this project done. Sure. I'll do a couple of cues. I'll do 20 minutes of music to help you get it done. It could be that the particular composer doesn't have the skills to write a certain type of music that needs somebody else to, including myself. I can't write everything at a certain level. A lot of things I can write really well, certain things I can't. And so I might bring somebody in to help me write some additional music. And it happens all the time for me too. But what I've learned is over the years is to try to give additional music credit as much as I can, and I do it as much as I can, and I do it most of the time to other composers. On occasion, because of contractual obligations in the contract that I have with the production company, I really can't get into that. It has to just be strictly somebody doing some ghostwriting. I haven't used ghostwriters that much or additional music composers that much, but I've done it a lot for other people. It's just the nature of my career over the years has been, I have a main road as a composer, but I also have two other main roads. And one of them as an orchestrator, which is a whole different thing. And also as a conductor, which is a whole different thing too. And then the other one, so there's really four main streams, is as an arranger, string arranger. Because of all the experience I have, not only as a composer, but as an orchestrator, conductor, and string arranger, I get called on a lot of projects, even to today, to do additional music and to help out other composers, because I have a lot of experience. And that's really interesting because a couple of years ago, I was thinking, I'm getting older. I'm not getting some of the calls that I want to get because this is the nature of this business. As you get older, younger people come in. And then all of a sudden I started getting so many calls. This is about 2 or 3 years, so many calls, 2 or 3 years, not only my own projects, but from other composers to do work. And I've been insanely busy the last couple of years, and I'm just so grateful for it. And I think it's because of everything we're talking about and that I'm talking about, these different sort of parts of my career that has kind of helped me now as someone who's a bit older. And that's like a whole nother discussion, which I don't even mind having because it's you're not there, you're just a young guy. But for us older people in the industry, it's a big problem.
It is. Ageism is a big deal in our business in particular because of, especially with the changing technologies, people assume they need somebody younger, they need someone new. You earn yourself to a certain level, and a lot of times people want to find the newest, person that they can kind of, I don't want to say undercut, but they can hire for almost nothing that doesn't know the rules or what's been built over the years. And so ageism is a big thing in our business. And I've been uniquely aware of it growing up as a kid because I watched, the people I started with are now kind of being pushed out of the business.
Oh, that's because there's a big gap in age between when you, right, and the other people.
And so for me, what it's done for me is it's given me a beautiful, complete perspective that I wouldn't have had because as I kind of, I like to think I'm coming into my prime in the next few years.
You are.
It's also made me uniquely aware of respecting the people who have been here because of their knowledge and their skill and valuing their experience and not participating in that, and hoping to be a place where we can have, what I want to have is productions that really are varied by age. Is I want the experienced people teaching the new people so that the new people can start at a higher level.
Yeah, I love that kind of thinking that you're doing, because truthfully, you'll be there in 20 years from now. You'll be in those same shoes. And if you can put that out in the world, and you're not doing it for yourself, obviously, you're doing it for the older ones that you're speaking about, but it'll help your generation too when you get to the next step. Part of my thoughts is because I've been lucky, and I'm still really busy, as I say. And I'm not just saying it to like make it look like I'm busy. I truly am busy.
I'll say it. You're super busy. Your name came up a ton when I was looking for people. It's why you're the first composer that I reached out to. And I was so humbled by you being willing to do this, is because you've worked in pretty much everything. And in a world where streaming is relatively new for you and I, because we've been in this so long, but when you're looking at people who have done television and comedy and drama, then they've done film, they've done small films, they've done short films, they've done documentaries, they've done dramas, they've done comedy, you've done, pretty much every category you could possibly click in, and, streaming and everything else. It's a beautiful thing to see someone who has that combination of experience where you've touched it all.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I feel the same way. And I have to sometimes, pinch myself and also be grateful, not be jealous of somebody else who gets another project. And why didn't I get it? All the stuff we all go through, the jealousies and the anger and all the stuff. I go through that too. But I truly am at this point really happy to be doing the work I'm doing. And right now I'm working on a film, a really big video game, arranging strings for a recording artist. And I'm working on a musical, not as a composer, but as a producer, orchestrator, conductor. And I'm saying all those things because, just like in your field, in my field, there are A-list composers, but there's not a list. There's not a long list. There's the Hans Zimmers and John Williams and these great composers as they are. And there's a handful, but there's still a lot of work for a lot of other composers. And I haven't reached those heights in terms of the most visible films as the primary composer, although I've worked on those films in different capacities. But there's something to a lot of behind the scenes people. I'm not going to say so much you, because you've been in front of the camera a lot too, but maybe you, when you put your hat on as a writer or something, that you don't have to sustain a really successful, personally successful and rewarding career. You don't have to be, that A-list person, the biggest movie star or the biggest name composer, and still have a very varied and far-reaching career. And I say that because I try to explain to younger composers that really just want to do the biggest films. That's not the only way. Yeah, maybe you'll get to be that person that works on the next Marvel, is the next Marvel superhero composer, but maybe not. One way, if you want to have a long sustained career, is to get really experienced and really good at many things so that people call on you as you get older. Now, that's not to say that, there's the flip side to that is, well, if you do too many different things, you're not an expert in anything. Well, there is something to that, I suppose, but at least in my field, it doesn't really apply.
People love for you to fit in a niche, and they love to know that you do X.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it can be difficult for them to understand that you can do, B and P and Q and all these other things, right? But if you're good at them, you'll show people your ability. And then, like you said, you have 4 or more real avenues. And so depending on what's going on or what the opportunity is, I think it also, for me, and probably for you too, as a creative person, it gives you a release and a way to explore different parts of you, so nothing ever gets boring, right? You never feel like this is the only thing I do.
That's so true. And that the perfect example of that is, it's probably fine for me to say this. I'm working on a movie now called Love and Country, which is a beautiful movie. I mean, it celebrates the LGBT sort of experience in the Vietnam War. All
right, everyone on? Good.
soldiers, two men, they fall in love, and it's like the horrors of Vietnam tied into this sort of deranged captain who wants them to go on this suicidal mission, basically. And yet they have this love affair between the two of them, and they need to survive. They're thinking about their future. You couldn't say you were gay in the Vietnam. You could never become an officer. There was a lot of problems then and now too. But and I'm mentioning this project because it's very low budget. It didn't pay me much, and I really couldn't care less. It was completely fine because I feel like it's one of those projects that will go out into the world and make it a better place. And I spent about 5 months on this score, which is a really long time, going back to that first discussion. And there was no temp score, which is great. The filmmakers were very open to me experimenting. And so that project lasted for months. Now, luckily, I've been able to save money and I'm fine financially, and I get my residuals as you do too. But I really needed to make some money also, because it's part of this business. You want to be rewarded for your talents. So I took a few other projects right when that ended, just like you just said. It wasn't that I was tired of composing the music. I was happy to, but I also wanted to make a project where I was paid nice and handsomely for my experience and my ability. And I'm able to jump around. I'm working with Michael Franti right now, who's a recording artist. He's very well known, and I'm doing a string arrangement on his, probably more than one, but at least one right now on his new record. I'm working on that musical I mentioned. So it's a nice, real variety of opportunities at this moment.
Okay, Randy, after being in this business for so long, for young composers or people who come into this business who wanted a piece of advice, what's the thing that you tell people in the beginning, and then what's the thing you wish people knew?
This is why I think I got working quickly, because back then, without computers and all these sort of things, you really had to be a skilled, sort of a trained musician. You didn't have to be, but it helped to be a trained musician who could write things out on paper and know how to conduct an orchestra and understand all the orchestral instruments, and also understood the pop music of that time, which I did very much because I'd played in bands and all that stuff. So I understood a lot of what was needed in the late 80s and 90s to get going. I was at the right place at the right time because of my skill set. Jump forward to now, that's much less important. You don't need to necessarily be a trained, conservatory trained musician, composer to get work. And so what I tell younger people is exactly that. I say, if you want to go to Juilliard or Berkeley or USC or any of the music schools, that's great, do it. But you don't have to, because of all the technology, you might stand a better chance or an equal chance getting great on your technology, understand all the computer tech stuff, understand how to run samplers, understand how to mix music as a recording engineer, all the behind the sort of the secondary work skills that a composer needs but doesn't have time. So a composer to come in and work, the best way now, I tell young, to put it in a nutshell, is to work for another composer. Join Hans Zimmer's team if you can, or many other composers. And in fact, for myself, I brought in plenty of young composers who've then gone off and had really good careers themselves. They've worked for me as an engineer, as a tech person, somebody who knows how to handle the samplers and electronic music, all this kind of stuff that I don't have time to do. I know how to do that as well, but when you're really busy, you can't do everything yourself. It's a team effort in composing. So that's my answer to a young person. In a nutshell, get your tech together. Get your tech, because there's a lot of opportunity in that area. If that's not your thing, then come in very trained as an orchestrator or a conductor or possibly a player. So if you have a really high-end skill set as a pianist or as a guitar player, but I'm talking about studio level quality, so it has to be very high, you might get some work for another composer playing for them as a player, and then you'll get opportunities to do some writing. So it's changed. So back, from way back then to now because of technology mostly.
What do you think your colleagues say is your best quality?
At this level, my level and your level, we're all really good at what we do. I mean, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing unless we're really good at it. I mean, so I don't want to qualify great versus really good, but let's just put the bar at really good. So we're all really good.
Right.
We're not hacks, you know, we're not people that shouldn't be here, and yet we're here. We're here for a reason, and we've stayed on for a reason because we know what we're doing. We do good work, or very good work. So I think for me, given that, and I'm nobody to qualify my own, you know, exceptionalism or very goodism or excellent-ism, whatever it is. But what I will say is I'm very, I think I'm a great collaborator. I'm easy to get along with. People like working with me, honest, respectful, I'm creative, all these things. But I think the thing that stands out for me is being collaborative. And I say that because in my long career, I think other colleagues would think of me, I hope anyway, is the collaboration.
Okay, I have my final round of questions. Some of them will be a little different because you don't spend as much time on set, because there's like call sheet and there's questions about craft service. But over the years, I'm sure you've been there. So I'm going to ask you them anyway. Just give me whatever answer comes to your mind.
Yeah.
What is the first thing you look for on a call sheet?
Well, we don't have call sheets as composers, but the equivalent of that would be either submit a demo for a film, or if I immediately get hired without a demo, which both ways happen. Somebody wants you, they call you, and you have to decide if you want to take the job at all. IMDb Pro, right there. I look for who's on the film and do I know them? Are they doing other projects? You know, is it somebody that has a reputation of somebody I want to work for? Obviously, I know something about the film at that point because I got a call about it, but I may not know the principals involved and post-production people involved and below the lines people involved. So that's what I look for, because there is, as you said, there is no call sheet. There is something that comes out when I work as a studio musician, when I'm conducting orchestras in town here. There is a union call, and then you see all the musicians. So I look at that to see who's on it, but I'm just happy to see names I know, which is always nice.
All right, now, on those sheets, what's the one thing you don't want to see?
That applies here and other countries. I've conducted orchestras really all over Europe and in Russia and different places. So I've been different places as a conductor, and I know some of the musicians in these different countries and the different orchestras, and as well here in town. Sometimes there's players that I don't dislike as people, but I'm not crazy about their playing for different reasons. And I have to decide if I want to replace that person or not, and that's really hard to do, and rarely do I do it, but there has been an occasion when I've seen a name and I went, no, that's the wrong person for this. So I hate doing that because that person is losing work because of my feelings about their playing. I'm just hoping that I made a smart decision, but like I said, that rarely happens.
I think people don't realize how much a conductor has to really understand not just the music, not just the rhythm, but the individual strengths and the way people collaborate, going back to collaboration as a whole, because what you're really doing is you're not playing a song, you're playing everyone's talents together and touching on people's abilities and lifting them.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I would say, just to give kudos to LA, that's never happened. Now I'm thinking about it, I can't recall a time where I saw a name on a Los Angeles union call where I didn't love every musician. They're so spectacular. They are the best in the world. There's nobody like. They're so good, so well-rounded, so versatile, play with so much emotion. That has happened in other places where I wasn't happy with certain musicians. I didn't want to see them again for that reason.
When you walk into that room as the conductor, like, what's that process like for a production? It's not just the music, but it's selecting people's skills and talents to highlight and really heighten moments.
The composer and orchestrator or conductor doesn't usually hire the musicians. There's a music contractor who hires the musicians, but they look to us for input. So they'll say, hey, how do you think about this person? this person. Well, if you have, you know, a 60-piece string section, and there's, you know, 26 violins, 25 of them you're not even going to think about, because it's a large group, but you might think about the first two, the principal, the concertmaster, and maybe the assistant principal, the second chair. And you will think about styles, about those people, or say the principal cellist or the principal horn player, French horn players. And you may want a certain type of player depending on the music. And if it's a big action film, you want somebody that can handle that kind of a sound, say as a French horn player, your lead French horn player. If it's a tender, dramatic piece and you have violin solos, you might want somebody who you know can do that really well, as compared to a 20th century contemporary compositional piece that deals with experimental and sort of extended techniques in string writing, which would be like classical music of the mid 1950s. You might want somebody specific for that. But to go to what you said about, this is not concert music like at Disney Concert Hall or at any of the great concert halls across the world. This is film music. So these musicians coming in are incredibly skilled. So as a conductor, they don't need help to play the parts. They don't need to be told, come in at this beat, you're playing the rhythms wrong. They're spectacular. Really, the main work that the conductor is doing is helping bridge the composer and the filmmakers that are in the control room to make sure that the orchestra is expressing the right emotion for the particular scene. So that's what the conductor is really doing, is really making sure that the music sounds and is portraying the emotion that the filmmakers want and that the composer wrote. But really about balance, who should be louder, who should be softer, who should play with more espressivo, more expression, who should play with less, so that you're not over dramatizing the way the music sounds. So it's this kind of sort of shaping and sort of color making of the orchestra. And also the other big thing is just time, because these orchestras are very expensive. The studios are very expensive. You need to get done a certain amount of music in a certain amount of time. So the conductor is the one that really kind of keeps things moving, keeps things kind of getting done properly on time. And you know, budget is incredibly important. It has to get done within budget. So
this is specific to what we're building and what we're shaping for this project. How does it fit together? And does that talent uplift the talent that you're going to see on the screen?
So true. If as we went way back to the beginning of our discussion, music is there to, and as you said, sometimes the audience doesn't even know that music is there. So the music is there to support the images, support the dialogue, support anything that has to do with media, whether it's a video game or a TV show or a movie. So that really comes together, especially in an orchestral session where, as compared to a electronic or synth score that you're writing, in your studio and slowly building it up and making it exactly how you want it after weeks of working on these individual parts. When you have an orchestra, it's happening in real time. And 20 minutes later, that piece of music that was 3 minutes long is recorded and it's done. I mean, it has to be mixed, but it's done. So it has to be shaped right on the spot, as compared to slowly building it up in your work studio at home.
Whether it be on set or maybe at a studio, what is your favorite thing to see at craft service? What's your favorite kind of thing to keep you going?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I really like to see in craft services, which I do see, which is so nice, is great fruit. The fruit is so nice and it's so refreshing. It's, I have to talk quite a bit as a conductor and express to musicians and the director and all that. So to have something like fruit, soothing, it's wet in your throat.
What's the one thing you don't want to see?
Coffee could be a little bit better. Okay.
Okay.
No, I mean, I don't drink a lot of coffee. I'm drinking coffee right now because I like to have it just as I'm speaking to kind of, soothe my throat a little bit. But I do have like a cup of coffee a day, and sometimes two. Since it's special for me and I don't drink a real lot of it, I like to have really nice coffee. And if I don't see that at craft services, I'm lucky enough to be in conducting. They'll go out and get me ones from somewhere special. So that's nice.
Randy, how do you define success?
That goes back to what I first talked about. I've worked on such a different variety of projects. And that's why I feel like I've had success. The most successful ones are the ones that I feel like I'm contributing. And I know I've said that a couple times, but it's so true. I look back and I go, yeah. And I go, other projects, by far, I've made much more money. And so that's success too, you know, this financial success. But it's not as important. I mean, maybe that's unfair to say if I wasn't, you know, if I was struggling financially right now, maybe I wouldn't say that. So I have to always be cognizant and appreciative of the fact that I'm secure financially, because not many people are not. So I think for me, the success is being able to write music for projects that have some impact, however small my contribution to the project is.
How everybody defines success is different. And I think you touched on a really important thing, because I normally ask people, how are you doing based on your definition? But as you said, you're doing very well on your definition, because for you, it's become about doing projects that have meaning. You have to take the jobs that pay a certain amount, or you have to do a certain number of kind of the more commercial jobs. But nobody stays in this business as long as you've been in it, or as long as I've been in it, because it's solely about business or paycheck, because there are other things you could do that are far more consistent.
That's so true.
And you wouldn't have to chase, because I mean, in our field, and for you in particular, you get short windows of time to make music, which is a high pressure, high movement kind of job. But then also you move on and you have to go get the next one.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And there's been plenty of times where I haven't had any work. I mean, there was time, like I was mentioning those 6 TV movies. Prior to those 6 TV movies, it was September. I remember very specifically September. I had no work. I had no work in September, October, November, December. No, September, October. It was like 4 or 5 months. And I sent out emails. I went to IMDb. I went to everywhere I could. And I looked. I had my agent looking, just nothing. And then an old friend who was a songwriter from somebody I knew for 30 years called me up, who was writing songs for those TV movies, and asked me if I wanted to compose one of them. One movie went to 5 more immediately after. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that because if you had asked me, if we were having this interview right now, 2018 or 17, whatever it was, I would go, well, you know, I don't know. I'm not being very successful. Things are just falling all apart. And that's the way it is. I mean, you get really busy and then there's nothing, and then you get really busy. I've had a nice stretch right now, but that's not to say that in June, when I'm finishing up the things I'm on now, I may not work for 6 months. Who knows? I don't know.
Oh, I know. I was on a production. I didn't work from October to January, and no one told me that that was going to be the case, right? In our business, that's forever. And you start, the little voice inside you starts to freak out. I've had 2 of those in the last 2 years, but each time I've been writing and working on other stuff. And it's funny because after that stretch, you get a big stretch, like you said, where all of a sudden you're doing a bunch of things. And then all that, the little personal stuff I was doing in that time, essentially off, that I didn't want, but that I was forced to take, it led to something else or empowered something I did next.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And every one of those hundreds of leads I sent out went nowhere, but that doesn't mean that they won't circle back around, you know, in a year or so from now. Maybe somebody will call, you know, or email, hey, remember you sent me that email? Well, I have something now for you. So at the time it felt wasted, which is interesting. And I'm sure you go through it too, is downtime. So, you know, what do you do during your downtime? Well, you know, that's a whole sort of another thing. I want to do a shout out before, I don't know if we're finishing up soon, but in case I forget, my manager from Bohemia Group, Peter Hackman, has been such a wonderful guy. He actually got me that film, Love and Country. He found it and called me up and asked me if I wanted to do it.
Okay, what's the one thing you want in any set or recording studio?
Assuming the musicians, obviously the musicians have to be great. That would be the number one, that show up in the space. But the second thing is the actual space itself. And as you can imagine, if you take 50 musicians and you put them in a large sterile room, meaning a room with just small ceilings and hard walls where the sound ricochets, as compared to this wonderful 200-year-old church with 30-foot ceilings and big wide open spaces, music's going to just vibrate wonderfully in that old converted church. So the first thing I look for is the sound of the room, assuming the musicians are all good. I don't really care about how it looks. I don't care how fancy it is. And studios build themselves up to look really beautiful and to impress people, but it's what they sound like. So I'll go in and just snap my fingers and clap my hands to hear the sound and to hear the reverb, the reverberation of what I do, how it goes into the room. And you learn a lot that way. By far, it's the sound of the room is the most important, not the look, not equipment has to be good, obviously kept up to record. That would be it, it's the sound.
I'm interested because that's not my area of expertise, right? So you talk about reverberation, you talk about coming in and making sound. You talked about hard, flat walls, which I know, and a short ceiling because then the sound bounces around. Yeah. What's something else that when you walk in, you just go, oh man, like what's the thing you don't want to see in a room?
Well, let me say something that you do want to see, and then because it'll trigger something I don't want to see. Well, I did some recording at Air Studios, Air Lyndhurst, which is in London. Beatles recorded so much there. You know, the first thing you see on the wall are all these amazing arrangements, string arrangements and band arrangements that the Beatles use. So you're going, wow, there's this history. You know, there's the piano that John Lennon or Paul McCartney used to play a particular solo. So those are all wonderful to see because there's a history, and I don't know, I feel like there's built-in vibes that sort of are into the walls and into the fabric from all these great musicians and great songs and great orchestras that have played there. I think there's something that I wouldn't want to see. The ownership or the management not caring much about your project, just looking at it as money. Mm-hmm. And you do see that on occasion. And it just, you know, it's just like, well, you know, it doesn't create a great vibe. You don't see that often, though. I got to say, you don't see that often. I have seen it, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, they're very welcoming to you coming in and bringing your project in there, but not always, not always.
We are making art, right? Like it can be very formal and very business oriented, but at the end of the day, there's a magic to kind of what happens. And music in particular has a resonance, and that resonance, I think, carries over space and time.
Yeah.
And to really enjoy that, I think you can feel when people are passionate about what they're doing. You can really feel the desire. So if it becomes a business thing, it just kind of shortchanges that portion of the passion.
Yes, no, that's so true. It's so true. And when studio owners and the management come in and actually listen to what you're doing, it's just such a great feeling. And that's usually what happens because they're happy to have this, like you said, these vibes and this energy coming into their studio, into their space, becoming part of that fabric that, like you say, does go over time. To go on what you're saying, when I was on a project that was recording at Air Studios, which Sir George Martin owned the studio, and he produced almost all the Beatles records. To walk in and see his string arrangement of Yesterday, which was one of the classics in terms of string arrangements on the wall, created such a nice vibe. It was so great. And unfortunately passed just a few years ago. But on this particular project, my wife was with me, Pamela, super friendly and a great personality and beautiful person overall. And she saw Sir George going outside. She ran out and said, no, you got to come in and please come in and say hello to everybody. He came into the studio, watched us recording this orchestra at Air Studios, and just stayed for the longest time, talked with me so long. And this is somebody he was a giant, in the pop field world. And so that having somebody like that come in and appreciate what we were doing, wanting to be part and put his stamp of approval on the project in his studio, it was like so great.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really nice.
For people who want to do sound or music or things in their home, people who are like coming out of a pandemic where most people have been stuck at home, right? If you wanted to start doing some stuff at home, what are the soundproofing, the little things that you think make a huge difference for people that they may not think of, or the space they should choose?
Oh, that's such a good question. That's such a great question, because it turns out that we are hopefully exiting the pandemic. But a year ago, when it was really bad. I was working on these projects that needed to get recorded. I was on a couple of projects that had to get musicians recorded. I was calling up the musicians I knew And a few of them had already started doing what we call remote recording. They recognized that people were doing that anyway before the pandemic. It's just the way things were getting done. Musicians were working in their home studio spaces for projects that didn't need to go to a big studio. So these lucky few who had already started it got incredibly busy during the pandemic. And others who hadn't done that realized they needed to get into it, not only for the pandemic, to work during the pandemic, but that's the way things are done now. Just so what I noticed working with a variety, and I've worked with vocalists of all kinds, and in the last year, and musicians of all kinds. Most of the players and the vocalists are working in sort of like a living room space, and that's very much dependent on the size of the living room and what's in the living room. So my suggestion would be two things: is you don't need, it doesn't cost that much to get really good equipment. 20 years ago, that equipment would have been literally $20,000 for a good Pro Tools system. You can get now for maybe $2,000 or $3,000. Mostly it's computer based, but you need a great mic. So you can get the computer pretty easy, and the software. You need to spend money on a really good microphone to help out that the space that you have may not be ideal. If you have that great mic close up to your voice, or the French horn or the trumpet, whatever it is, help out with the lack of having a great studio space. So I think there's two things: it's the space and also the technology. Get the technology together. Do the best you can with the space that you can by buying technology to accommodate that space.
What is the best thing you've gotten from working on a project?
The first thing that popped into my mind was the Heart of Nuba, and the director, Ken Carlson, who's a good friend and somebody I've done several documentaries with. Super brave, man. I wouldn't have done what he did. He went to the South Sudan and filmed all this stuff, and I mean, literally, people were dying in front of him. It was horrible. Bombs were dropping, and somehow he got all this footage out. And then when I heard that Bashir's government, who was the dictator of Sudan, crumbled about a year and a half ago, Ken's film played a big part in it, because Bashir knew about Ken's film and wanted that copy and wanted it destroyed, couldn't get it. I mean, it sounds like a spy novel, the stuff that Ken told me, but it was all true. When I heard that government fell and that this film had something to do with it, at least that's the most recent one but to be honest, almost every project, I mean, this sounds kind of corny, but each project has its own special little gift, because this project I'm on now, Love and Country, if it makes a difference and brings to light some of the LGBT issues going on now and in the Vietnam War, especially then, that will be my new gift. When I work with Michael Franti, I've worked with Michael for 20 years on at least 6 or 7 of his records. Michael's songs have such strong social impact messages. Each time I work on one of his songs as a string arranger, in that instance, as compared to as a composer on the prior two, I feel like I get a little gift because I helped get his message out to the world. So it shifts all over the place. Sometimes it's as simple as getting to travel, and record something like I was talking about at Air Studios and get to meet George Martin. So there's constant little gifts all the time.
Each project brings its own gift, like you said. Gratitude is a big thing. And you use the word, right? You're so grateful for it. And then, people who love what they do, we're just like, let's just keep going, right? What's the next one, right? What's the next experience? Okay, Randy, how do you want the people who work with you to remember you?
I would like them to sit down, even if they weren't directly involved with the music. What I mean to say is maybe they were the DP or the editor. The editor is involved with the music, but the film is edited by the time the composer gets the score. So, I mean, I know the director listens to every bit of music. That's obvious. And the producer, some of it, or most of it, or all of it. But I would like all my collaborators to sit down and have a chance to really listen to the music on its own or with the picture, but really focus in on it and appreciate what I did. And you act and you put your work out there. Or when you write a script, in my case, when I'm writing music, you're really putting yourself out there, because somebody can just say that's shit, I don't like it. And so you have to put yourself out there and bury yourself emotionally and artistically. I would like people to, any of my collaborators, to really listen to what I did to see how I put myself out there on an emotional sort of artistic level. So that's one thing. And the other thing, which I think is equal to it, and I touched on it earlier, is that they'll remember me as somebody who was someone they wanted to spend time with, because kind of like a marriage with a composer and a director for a couple of months. I mean, it's very intense. You're constantly in touch with them and or the producer who you work with every day, whether it's over Zoom or in person or whatever it is. So you'd want them to feel like they had an inspiring and successful collaboration with me. I would like them to feel that way.
Yeah, I totally resonate with the desire to have the people you work with remember how much you laid bare and went all in for the project. Because to me, I really respect the people I work with and collaborate, even the people who may not even be on set at the time, or the people who are seemingly far removed, because we are all connected in this essence and our names live together forever. And I really take a value in that. And it's part of the reason I want to do this show, is to highlight how many different people bring their amazing talents together, so people will take that moment and, like in your case, maybe step away from the visual and just close your eyes, take in all the music, take in the way it makes you feel and how it accents what you did on a visual level or on a technical level and all of those other things. You're committed from the beginning to the end, and you took every essence and every note had a purpose to you.
That's so well put. And I want to say, to kind of jump off what you just said, most people don't understand that. I'm not really even sure what it's like for you professionally. It may be different, but for a composer and for myself, and I think most composers, when we get hired on a project, it's 7 days a week, 10 hours, 12 hours a day. And I know you know what I mean when you put your editor hat on, for sure. But there's no weekends off. There's no days off. There's no Christmas. There's nothing off. You're just 100% committed to it. And that's the way it is. And I suppose the flip side of it is then you have 4 weeks off, or 6 weeks, or 6 months off, whatever, nobody knows. But it's 100%. And for folks that don't understand that, that is the commitment. I might complain about it to my wife or my kids or something, but I love it. I mean, I love sitting here, I love sitting down here and at my workspace and writing the music. Even though I might complain about the schedule or about this, about that, what gives me my identity and my self-awareness of who I am. And it is central to what I think of myself and what I hope other collaborators think about me, as a dedication and integrity that I believe I bring to. I'm not talking about talent, that's for somebody else to decide, but I do bring the integrity and the commitment to any project that I work on.
Well, I think that's so important, and it kind of brings me to my last question, which is, what is the legacy that you want your loved ones to take from your life? Yeah,
I mean, I've been really fortunate, again, to live where I live, which I'm looking outside because I just love it. I mean, maybe I should turn the camera around just so you can see it. Just open space. It's really nice. And this space that I'm in, we built when my wife and I, Pamela and I, bought this house 25 years ago. It was -3 big spaces. And so we built these rooms. So this is my space that I live in. I work in and live in practically. And the 2 other rooms are big recording rooms where I can put musicians in. And going back to your question, we built those rooms so I would not have to open up a studio somewhere else. It's a personal decision. I wanted to work at home because we decided to have a family, and we have 2 kids, and I was able to be home all through all that time, not have to go to a separate studio to work, which is nothing wrong with that. It's just a personal decision. Lots of good reasons to go to a studio and open up a studio there as well. But in my case, because I could be at home and be part of my family, even though I was busy, that I want them to remember that. And they do. They have musicians come, just like I did when I was a kid, when I was talked about my mother and bringing pianists in to rehearse her. I had great musicians here all through their childhood, violinists and clarinet players and French horn players and singers and drummers. And they heard all this stuff all the time. And they're both excellent musicians. They didn't go into the music field, but they're both excelled at music. And so I would want them to remember all that music that happened in this household. And also, I think I want them to remember the dedication and integrity that I did put into my work. So as they go into their fields, they're both in their early 20s, they're both just starting to branch out. They'll remember that for whatever careers that they end up doing, that, oh, you know, Dad used to work really hard in there, and he put time and he got up early and he did his work and all that kind of thing. And for my wife, Pamela, but she's been integral, so important in my life, because she used to be in the business herself, in the industry. She understands all the business inside and out. She's helped me all along the way, making contacts, helping me maintain my career. And she's gone on some fun trips with me overseas in different places. So I hope that the kids in particular remember all those things, the dedication, the trips, the joy that I had in my career, but also see the bad times too, when I'm frustrated and I'm not happy and I didn't get paid enough, or someone else got a job, because, you know, you can't paint it as just all rosy. You need to have both. So they're seeing both in. So hopefully they'll see the realism of what my career has been like as well.
I think it's a beautiful legacy. I had kids really early. I took a step back and I wanted to make sure I was heavily involved. And you did this beautiful thing. And I think it's a beautiful legacy of saying, this is my career. This is what I want. This is what I'm doing. But I'm going to do it mostly at home, because at times it's easier to have a studio and go someplace else, because you have a separate space and you don't have to worry about what's going on with the kids, or what a family thing or something else coming in and interrupting. You can have a dedicated space and you can work 24 hours if you need to. And in our business, every once in a while, you kind of almost do, right?
So true.
So to have this dedication to home and family, that we're going to do it here and we're going to come together as a family, but that you're going to see, really, they got to see you build your legacy, and they got to be a part of it and know that they were central in your plan and what was important. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for saying that so much. And I have kids pretty close to the same age. And so it's as mine are going out into the world, it's the same thing, as I want mine to see that Dad always chases dreams, that it wasn't easy, that there were lots of hiccups and how we navigated that. And I hope that they'll forgive me on the days that I was too stressful or that I didn't handle it my best. But I think overall what they saw is somebody was committed and loved what they did and chased their dream and continued to find a way, and that they were always central. So that totally resonates with me.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure this will resonate with you too, because my kids are at their age that they are. They may not, I mean, right now they're, for good reason, concentrating on their own lives, and I want them to be. But later on, when they're a bit older and successful, which I'm sure they will be, they'll think back more, and like you said, they'll understand whatever times weren't that easy, when I was harsh and couldn't do anything but get back to work, and had to, and understand both sides of it, just as you just said it. One other thing that ties into that ties into the biology that we first talked about. When I moved here to Los Angeles, I came from the East Coast, as I mentioned, upstate New York, the Catskill Mountains, all green and whatnot and pretty. So I always wanted to have a place to go that was like that. So we ended up buying some land up in the Sequoia Mountains, up in the Sequoia National Forest. And we built a cottage up there in 2005. So that's been a place that I set up a little studio there that we don't use it as much now. But when the kids were young, we'd go up there all the time, and I do some work up there and provided them with, like, even though it was still around music and my work up there, it gave them a feeling of simplicity, getting away from, there was no internet. We put internet in there last year, finally, after 15 years, we finally put an internet in. There was none of that. It was just detached from everything. We did have electricity and we did have bathrooms, but so they got so I hope they remember the legacy of that as well, as trying to balance everything here the old Topanga, Calabasas area versus the simplicity of the old school type of thing up in a little cottage up in the Sequoia Mountains where we still had music.
I love it. Randy, thank you so much for coming on Fish's Call Sheet, for taking people behind what it means to be a composer, for giving us really a full perspective of a job that's so important. And I hope people will stop and listen to some of their favorite projects and realize the impact the music makes, and then look and see who did it.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for involving me and bringing me in and giving me a chance to help people understand what being a composer is all about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you liked what you saw, or maybe you want to know more about the entertainment industry, check out some of our other episodes where we dive into other departments as I celebrate all the amazing people who make production possible.